Snow blanketed the mountain pass before the bikers appeared. Engines roared in the storm, helmets glinting in the neon lights as 6 bikers weaved toward the small gas station like predators sniffing for a weak spot. Everyone inside froze. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Then all eyes turned to the lone cop who stepped out of her SUV K9, Saren Aldridge, her expression cold and calm, too focused on the icy wind to notice the approaching danger. The iron snakes surrounded her car in seconds, boots crunching on ice, smirks growing brighter as one reached for the K9's locking latch. They thought she was outnumbered. They thought she was cornered. They thought she was alone. But they never got a good look at the SUV, because inside were 3 federally trained German shepherds waiting for a word. And as the cyclists crossed the finish line, those dogs stepped out into the storm and showed what real discipline looks like. Before we get started, please like, subscribe, and let me know, where are you watching tonight? Let's listen and feel the stories that bring value and inspiration to life together. Snow drifted lightly across the high ridge, blurring the narrow mountain road into silver streaks beneath the dim Colorado sunset. Saren Aldridge guided her K9 SUV steadily along the icy bend, her gloved hands firm on the wheel as the sky deepened into a bruised violet. At 29, Saren carried the quiet grace of someone who had learned to live between shadows, tall and lean, with dark auburn hair pulled into a low braid that grazed her collar, and skin pale from too many winter shifts. Her eyes, a muted evergreen, always seemed to hold a cautious alertness, a habit born from years of watching danger emerge from the smallest overlooked places. She had joined the department young, driven by an instinct to protect rather than a hunger for authority, but she rarely boasted or spoke much about it. Most people in Raven Ridge described her as distant, not unfriendly, just guarded, as though some old memory still echoed around inside her, and she preferred not to disturb it. In truth, the memory existed, a rescue call 5 years prior, where she arrived minutes too late to save a lost hiker whose frantic family still lived somewhere in her mind. She had learned since then to walk with guilt in one pocket and resolve in the other. Inside the heated rear compartment rested her 3 German shepherd partners. Rook, the oldest at 6, had a heavy black saddle of fur and a regal, squared head with amber eyes that never missed a movement. He carried himself like a seasoned officer, calm and intimidating, with a quiet wisdom that made him the natural front of their trio. Harlow, 4 years old and broad-shouldered for a shepherd, had a darker coat and a sharper snout, always alert, always listening, his temperament steady but his instincts fierce. Trainers often said he sensed tension before humans even realized they were nervous. And Nix, barely 3, lean and fast with a silver-tan coat, was the most reactive, bright, curious, with an almost philosophical intelligence in her gaze, as though she evaluated every situation 3 seconds ahead of everyone else. Though different in age and build, the 3 dogs shared a disciplined loyalty that bound them like threads in the same braid. Saren exhaled softly as she approached a long curve overlooking a drop-off, where clouds looked like ghostly waves crashing below. She had just finished a full day at the Federal K9 Advanced Training Center. Hours of tactical drills, scent detection challenges, and formation maneuvers. Rook had performed flawlessly. Harlow had earned a rare commendation. Nix, though young, had impressed evaluators with her synchronized movement during disarm scenarios. Saren herself had received a quiet nod from the lead instructor implying she was capable of more than simple transport work. The thought lingered in her mind like a warm ember, tempting but fragile. She tried not to dwell on it. Promotion meant responsibility, and responsibility meant repeating the same fear she carried from that rescue years ago. What if she failed someone again? The snow thickened, drifting in spirals when the wind swept through the cut of the mountain. Saren leaned slightly forward, checking the road signs barely visible beneath frost. The inside of the SUV hummed with the familiar, comforting rhythm of the dog's breathing. Rook shifted behind her seat, letting out a low exhale like an old soldier easing into a more comfortable position. Harlow raised his ears as the tires crunched through a patch of refrozen slush. Nix, eyes half open, watched Seren through the mesh partition as if studying her state of mind. Seren wondered, not for the first time, whether the dogs sensed her thoughts. They often seemed to, especially Rook, who had a way of stepping close whenever she drifted too far into her worries. The road unwound into a clearing where the sunset cast long shadows across the ridgeline, turning the snow a muted rose. For a moment, Seren felt something peaceful wash over her, an odd, gentle reminder that despite the isolation of the mountains, despite the guilt she carried and the long nights she still feared, she wasn't truly alone. She had 3 partners in the back seat, loyal in a way few humans ever were. She had a town waiting below the pass where people relied on her quiet steadiness. She had a purpose, whether she felt ready for it or not. Her radio crackled with a soft burst of static, but no call followed. Probably just interference from the ridge, she told herself. Still, the sound tugged her posture slightly tighter. Instinct never fully slept in Seren, it merely rested. And tonight something felt strange in the air, not threatening, merely shifting, like the mountain holding its breath. Perhaps it was the incoming snowstorm the forecast had warned about, or perhaps it was simply fatigue. She would be home soon, just down the pass, through the valley, and past the old water tower that always looked like a rusted sentinel watching over Raven Ridge. The SUV dipped into another curve, and Seren glanced in the rearview mirror. Rook's amber eyes met hers. A small, solemn comfort settled in her chest. She adjusted her grip on the wheel and continued down the road, unaware that the coming hours would test everything she thought she knew about control, instinct, and the thin line between fear and courage. But for now, the mountain remained quiet, the snow gentle, and the world, just for a fleeting moment, felt safe. Seren Aldridge eased her SUV down the descending curve of Raven Ridge Pass, the steep drop on her right, vanishing beneath swirling curtains of snow. The dimming light had turned the icy guardrails into pale streaks, and the cold pressed against the windows like a silent warning. She kept one hand steady on the wheel, her evergreen eyes flicking instinctively to the rearview mirror. At first, it was only a single spark, one headlight glinting through the dusk. But then another emerged, and another, until 6 motorbikes carved their way through the white haze. Their engines growled like distant thunder, echoing off the cliffs in a rolling wave. Seren felt her posture stiffen. She had seen plenty of bikers on the mountain roads, but these riders moved differently, too coordinated, too synchronized, as if they were a single organism instead of 6 individuals. Rook lifted his head behind her, amber eyes narrowing. Harlow shifted his paws, letting out a low rumble, barely audible over the engine. Even Nix, usually calm until a threat was clear, opened her pale eyes wider, watching the shifting lights through the mesh barrier. Seren recognized the signs. The dog sensed something before she consciously formed the thought. The group closed in but didn't attempt to pass. Instead, they matched her speed precisely, hovering in the SUV's blind spots like predators waiting for a slip. She inhaled steadily, swallowing the first flicker of unease. She had dealt with reckless riders before, teens from the valley, smugglers trying to outrun weather. But these movements lacked the usual swagger. Their precision unsettled her. As snow began to fall faster, Seren spotted the sign for a small fuel station nestled against the cliff, an old landmark for truckers with faded red lights and a single diner attached. She flicked on her blinker, telling herself she needed to check the heater regulation for the dogs before the storm thickened. But beneath that rational thought was an instinctive urge for open space and visibility. The bikers did not peel away when she slowed. Instead, they funneled around her as she turned into the lot, tires hissing on the ice. They spread into a semicircle, engines idling, helmets turned toward her in silent watchfulness. Seren parked beneath the dim overhang light, her breath steadied. Decision, not fear. Calm, not panic. A cold gust slapped her cheeks as she stepped out, her tall frame straightened by habit, auburn hair brushing her collar. From behind the diner window, an older waitress paused mid-step. This was Maribel Locke, a thin woman in her late 60s with soft gray hair pinned in a loose bun and deep smile lines etched into her cheeks, though the smile itself rarely appeared these days. She had lived most of her life between diesel fumes and snowstorms, and she recognized trouble instantly. Trauma from a robbery 20 years earlier had left her wary of loud engines and men who traveled in groups. She lowered the blinds halfway, worry sharpening her gentle blue eyes, but unable to look away completely. The bikers dismounted almost in unison. The first to step forward was Merritt Crow, tall and broad with a thick dark beard and a long scar slanting down his neck, a mark from a knife fight years ago, which had carved both flesh and personality into something hardened and dangerous. His leather jacket bore the crude emblem of the Iron Serpents, a local outlaw group with a reputation for intimidation more than violence, though Merritt himself was known for pushing boundaries. His boots crunched on ice as he approached, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smirk. Behind him, another rider swung his leg off the bike. He was leaner, younger, with messy blonde hair poking from beneath his helmet and a restless stare. Seren didn't know him yet, but he would be identified later as Taven Rusk, a jittery 22-year-old who followed trouble the way moths followed fire, naively, hungrily, without considering the burn. Rook stood behind the mesh panel, motionless except for the slow lift of his head, his gaze locked on Merritt with a soldier's precision. Harlow's low growl vibrated faintly against metal panels, steady and controlled. Nyx remained silent, but her tail lowered, her weight shifting forward, signs Seren had come to recognize as heightened readiness. Merritt's voice broke through the wind, low and mocking. "A lone officer on a freezing ridge. That's gutsy." Seren kept her tone flat. "Evening, keep your distance from the vehicle, please. Working dogs inside." She watched Merritt's boots, not his grin. Hands can betray more than expressions. One of the riders, stocky, with a patchy beard and a crooked nose, wandered around the SUV with deliberate slowness. His name Seren didn't know yet. Caleb Stein, a man whose temper had been shaped by a lifetime of feeling invisible, a man who often picked fights simply to confirm he existed. He brushed his fingers along the back handle of the K9 compartment, the trivial touch charged with provocation. The dogs reacted instantly. Rook's bark thundered once, deep and commanding, an officer's warning. Harlow's growl sharpened. Nyx took a full step forward, muscles quivering with restrained instinct. Seren moved quickly, intercepting Caleb's hand with her own, voice low but firm. "Do not touch that latch." Caleb chuckled, but his surprise flickered. Merritt tilted his head, studying Seren not with casual arrogance now, but with the first glimmer of calculation. The snow thickened, hissing across the asphalt. The gas station lights buzzed. Seren felt the moment balancing on a thin line, the mountain air tight with tension. She needed to de-escalate, but the dog's behavior told her this wasn't a simple case of posturing. Something was wrong with these men, something the dog sensed deeper and earlier than she ever could. Still, she kept her tone steady. "Gentlemen, step back. You're crowding a police unit." But Merritt only smiled wider, stepping close enough she could smell cold gasoline from his jacket. "Relax, officer. We're just saying hello." His words dripped with a slow, dangerous ease. Behind him, the Iron Serpents remained silent, inhaling the storm-wrapped air as though waiting for a signal. Seren's pulse did not spike, but her awareness sharpened to a needlepoint. She wasn't afraid, not yet, but she was very aware she might be standing at the start of something that would not end with a simple warning. In the SUV, Rook shifted again, the faint scrape of his claws against metal sounding like a countdown. Nix's gaze sharpened as if she were reading Merritt's intent like script on snow. Harlow's ears flattened slightly, muscles tensing for a command that hadn't yet been given. Seren felt the strange certainty settle in her chest. The night wasn't simply cold. It was waiting. The wind on Raven Ridge Pass roared harder as the storm thickened, whipping the snow sideways and turning the gas station lights into smeared halos trembling through the cold air. Seren Aldridge felt the sting of icy flakes gathering along her auburn braid and the collar of her uniform jacket, her tall frame rigid against the rising threat. Merritt Crow dragged his gloved fingers across the SUV once more, the gesture taunting, almost theatrical. His scarred neck gleamed under the buzzing light, and the smirk beneath his dark beard tightened as though he relished the tension building in the frozen lot. Caleb Stein, shorter and stockier, flicked his patchy bearded chin in amusement, while the youngest, Taven Rusk, bounced the heavy chain in his hand like a toy he couldn't wait to misuse. Seren had seen enough body language to know none of these men were just posturing anymore. The shift in their stance, the narrowing of their eyes, the way they spread around her in an uneven arc, all of it signaled escalation. She steadied her breathing and kept her tone controlled, insisting they step away from a federal K-9 vehicle, but her warnings only emboldened them. They weren't listening. They were watching the way a bully watches someone he believes can't push back. Behind the mesh panel, the dogs reacted with perfect synchronicity. Rook rose first, his broad frame filling the compartment, amber eyes fixed and unblinking. Harlow began a low, circular pacing, measured, preparing angles, assessing distance. Nix leaned closer to the door, her silver-tan coat bristling as muscles tightened along her spine, her intelligence sharpening into something narrowly focused. Seren felt their collective readiness like a current humming behind her, but she also knew that unleashing them without control could lead to disaster, not because they would lose discipline, but because Merritt's gang would twist any excuse into claim of brutality. Her job wasn't just to protect herself, it was to prevent a narrative that put innocent dogs at risk. Merritt stepped closer, towering just slightly above Seren. His breath carried a metallic coldness, and when he placed a hand on her shoulder, not violently but arrogantly, Seren's pulse froze for half a second. She hated being touched without consent, hated the sense of vulnerability it brought. Images of that failed rescue years ago flickered unwelcome in her mind, the helplessness, the inability to stop something terrible. But now she wasn't helpless, and she sure as hell wasn't alone. Her voice remained calm but carried a sharpened edge as she said the command, low and crisp, "Stand by." The reaction behind her was immediate silence. The dogs ceased all motion as if their bodies locked into a single heartbeat. Seren pulled the latch and swung the compartment door outward. 3 German shepherds descended into the storm, not with wild aggression but with precision, their claws clicking softly against the frozen ground. Rook lowered his body first, head forward, stance wide. Harlow angled slightly to her left, his broad shoulders forming a shield against anything sweeping from that direction. Nix kept to the right, her position fluid but stable, her eyes scanning shadows beyond the pumps. The bikers stiffened, not from fear but from sudden recognition of what they were facing, not pets, not house-trained animals, but trained officers executing a formation meant for high-threat extractions. Snow whirled between them, caught in the harsh light, and the storm's howl rose as though the mountain itself had paused to witness the standoff. Merritt's smirk faltered as Rook locked his amber gaze onto him with a silent, unwavering authority. Caleb's bravado sagged as Harlow's low growl drilled through the wind, not loud but resonant, the kind that signaled a calculated readiness to engage. Taven Rusk, still clutching the chain, shifted his weight nervously, his restless blue eyes darting between the 3 dogs as though he suddenly regretted every impulsive decision he had made that evening. The diner door creaked behind the frosted window. Maribel Locke, the elderly waitress watching with widening fear, slipped out just a fraction, her thin face framed by escaped strands of gray hair. She held a small cordless phone in her trembling hand. She didn't step out fully, too much past trauma for that. But she kept her gaze fixed on Seren with silent pleading, silently promising she'd stay ready to call the sheriff if things collapsed. Merritt laughed once, though the sound was thinner than before. "What now, officer? Think your fancy dogs are going to scare us off?" Seren didn't answer. She shifted her left foot back, anchoring her stance, her evergreen eyes narrowing against the cutting snow. Her instincts tugged at her nerves. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a testing ground. Merritt wasn't simply asserting dominance. He was probing, trying to see how far he could push before she broke. Taven made the next mistake. He stepped forward, twirling the chain with a sharp metallic hiss. "Bet they won't do a thing," he muttered, though his voice carried a tremor. Harlow tensed, but held formation at Seren's earlier command. Nix tracked the movement of the chain with razor-still eyes. Seren felt her jaw tighten. She had milliseconds to decide, escalate and risk the dogs getting blamed, or wait 1 second longer and risk the chain connecting with her shoulder or head. The storm howled around them, disguising the subtle scrape of Taven adjusting his grip. Caleb shifted to Seren's right, an attempt to flank her. Nix moved instantly, lowering herself, blocking Caleb's angle without breaking discipline. Even Merritt paused, momentarily thrown off by the silent tactical choreography unfolding before him. Seren's heart pounded once in her ribs, hard, loud, decisive. "This is your last warning," she said, her voice clear, even, through the wind. "Step back." But violence had already entered the space. Taven lifted the chain, shoulders tightening, breath fogging out in uneven bursts. Rook inhaled sharply, a soldier bracing for impact. Seren began shifting her weight to intercept. She never allowed her dogs to take the first hit. When the situation snapped, the storm gusted, pushing snow into Taven's eyes, causing him to blink and hesitate. Caleb cursed softly, slipping on the thin ice. Merritt's posture stiffened with indecision. The triangle formation remained firm, every muscle in every canine tense but controlled, awaiting only one more word or gesture from their handler. The entire world seemed to narrow to that single frozen moment. The storm, the lights, the spinning chain, the snow-laced breath of 3 German shepherds standing like sentinels. Seren could feel the next eruption coming, feel it coiling like a spring pressed too tightly, and she knew that within seconds, either she would regain control or the mountain would swallow the night in violence. The snowstorm crashed over the ridge with a force that seemed almost sentient, slashing sideways across the gas station lot and turning every surface into a trembling blur beneath the flickering neon lights. Seren Aldridge felt the sting of the icy wind cut across her cheeks as the situation broke open in a way she had anticipated and feared. Taven Rusk's chain sliced downward in a violent arc, the air hissing around it. But Rook, massive, black-saddled, and still carrying the calm authority of an old mountain sentinel, lunged with perfect precision, his shoulders slamming into Taven's thigh and knocking the trajectory off course. The chain clattered onto the ice, ringing out like a dropped weapon on a silent battlefield. Caleb Stein stumbled back as Harlow swept low across the ground, blocking his attempted flank with the decisive movement of a trained shield. Nix shifted with chilling elegance, her silver-tan coat bristling as she stalked each centimeter of Seren's perimeter, mouth closed but breath sharp, creating a living circle of protection. The iron serpents froze, not out of fear yet, but confusion, because none of the dogs snapped or bit. None acted like wild animals. Their formation was too controlled, too deliberate, too professional. Inside the diner, Maribel Locke pressed a trembling hand against the window, her soft blue eyes wide as she watched the fight unfold. A trucker wearing a faded denim jacket pulled out his phone with clumsy urgency. This was Dean Koffler, a middle-aged hauler with sun-damaged skin, a reddish beard peppered with gray, and the kind of tired, wary expressions belonging to a man who had survived too many winters on the road. Dean was the type who rarely involved himself in anything, but tonight the memory of losing a friend to roadside violence years ago snapped him into action. "Calling 911, he muttered, voice tight as steel. Another patron, a younger woman named Laurel Pikes, short with chestnut curls and freckles but eyes that carried a stubborn courage, lifted her phone to film, her fingers trembling from both fear and adrenaline. Laurel had grown up with a police father who died on duty. Recording the truth felt like a sacred reflex. Outside, Merritt Crow's smirk fully evaporated. The scar on his neck twitched as if his pulse hammered directly beneath it. The neon lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting his dark beard and cold eyes in alternating stripes of blue and red. For the first time, Seren saw uncertainty flash across his face. Not fear, but a realization that he had badly misjudged his opponent. She stood centered behind the canine triangle, tall and unmoving, her evergreen eyes focused and unreadable beneath drifting strands of snow-dampened auburn hair. She didn't shout, didn't draw her weapon, didn't panic. Her stillness was more commanding than any raised voice. From the darkness beyond the pumps came the distant shriek of sirens, thin at first, then swelling into a roar as patrol vehicles cut through the storm. The sound punched through the tension, scattering it like brittle glass. 3 squad cars slid into the lot, tires spitting slush. Their blue and red lights splashed over ice, concrete, and leather jackets. Merritt swore under his breath. Caleb raised his hands defensively. Tavin staggered backward, clutching his bruised thigh, the chain forgotten on the ground. The officers stepping out were tense, their hands hovering near their holsters as they took in the uncanny tableau. Seren standing firm behind 3 German shepherds locked in perfect formation, the bikers circling with empty hands, the chain glinting by Tavin's boot. Snow clung to every figure, as though the storm itself had frozen the moment in a photograph of danger. Rook held his stance with disciplined pride, ears forward, chest wide. Harlow remained low but steady, his powerful shoulders forming a barricade. Nick's eyes flicked, tracking every micro-movement like a strategist calculating angles. Seren lifted a hand faintly, not a command, but a subtle sign of control. The dogs adjusted instantly, relaxing their weight but holding their positions. The officers exchanged glances, startled by the level of synchronization. One of them approached, tall with a square jaw and dark stubble. This was Deputy Colin Harrow, a rugged, broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, with wind-chapped skin and dark hair tucked under his patrol hat. He had a reputation for being level-headed, shaped by a near-fatal avalanche rescue 5 years earlier that had carved caution deep into his instincts. His gray-blue eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "are you harmed?" Seren shook her head once. At that moment, a heavier step approached, measured, authoritative. Lieutenant Crawford Ames, silver-gray hair swept neatly beneath his winter cap, lines of experience etched across his stern face, moved toward the group with steady confidence. His presence quieted the younger deputies almost immediately. Crawford had the kind of posture that came from decades of making critical calls in bad conditions, a man whose judgment had been forged through countless winters and more than one violent confrontation. When his gaze met Rook's, his expression softened with subtle respect. Then he looked at Seren. "Those aren't pets," he said over the storm, his voice low but warm. "They're officers." Before Merritt could form a rebuttal, Laurel Pikes pushed out of the diner, her curly hair plastered to her cheeks from the cold. "Lieutenant," she said, breath shaking, "you need to see this." She held up her phone, the screen showing the entire incident, from the moment the bikers surrounded Seren to the chain being lifted and the dogs responding with restraint. Crawford watched the footage with a clenched jaw, the storm wind snapping against his coat. Then he shifted his stare to Merritt, whose confidence was now draining into the snow. "You want to explain this?" Crawford asked. Merritt hesitated, first time all night, before muttering something about misunderstandings. But the video showed no misunderstandings, no bites, no lunges, no aggression except from the bikers, only a handler keeping composure and 3 dogs performing with textbook precision. Crawford exhaled sharply, nodding once to Seren. "You handled that flawlessly." And then louder to his deputies, "Cuff them all." The storm swallowed the sound of the handcuffs clicking into place as the iron serpents were restrained one by one. Snow piled on their shoulders, their bravado melting into bitter silence. Rook, Harlow, and Nix eased finally out of their rigid formation, stepping closer to Seren, brushing against her legs in quiet reassurance. Under the harsh neon glow, the truth had been exposed, and Seren's canine partners had proved exactly who they were. The storm eased into a softer, ghost-like drift as the patrol cars pulled away from the gas station, carrying Merritt Crow and the iron serpents in the back seats, their once boastful complaints fading into the wind like broken fragments of bravado. Seren Aldridge stood beneath the flickering overhang light, the snow settling on the shoulders of her jacket and along the auburn braid that hung like a wet rope down her back. Rook, Harlow, and Nix pressed closer to her legs, their coats damp but warm, their breaths steaming into the cold air in synchronized puffs. The people who had witnessed the confrontation, from Dean Koffler with his weathered reddish beard to Laurel Pikes with her freckled cheeks and resolute expression, found themselves momentarily silent, struck not just by what had happened, but by the discipline and quiet heroism they had seen unfold. Then a wave of soft applause began, uncertain at first, then gathering warmth. Seren bowed her head slightly, more humbled than proud, her evergreen eyes reflecting gratitude rather than self-congratulation. She crouched to rest a hand along each dog's strong neck, her fingers brushing through Rook's thick fur, tapping lightly against Harlow's broad shoulder and pressing a grateful palm to Nix's intelligent muzzle. Lieutenant Crawford Ames approached, brushing snow from the brim of his cap. His silver-gray hair caught the neon glow, giving him an almost spectral presence against the storm-swept dark. His stern features softened as he looked at Seren, a young officer who had just proven a level of control and courage that many seasoned deputies struggled to develop. His voice was quieter than usual, pitched for her alone. "Seren, you ever consider applying to the Federal K-9 Division full-time? Not everyone can steady a team like that under pressure. You have the instinct and the bond." Seren let out a long breath, exhaustion and adrenaline mixing in her veins. She didn't answer immediately. The idea had always seemed too big, too distant, something meant for people louder than she was, braver than she believed herself to be. Yet tonight had shifted something inside her. She looked at Rook's amber eyes, Harlow's patient steadiness, and Nix's silent devotion, and something she had buried deep for years stirred awake. Crawford placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture without dominance but with mentorship. "Think about it. Raven Ridge is lucky to have you, but the world beyond this pass? It could use someone like you, too." When Seren finally returned to her SUV, the storm had thinned into a soft lace drifting across the windshield. She climbed behind the wheel, the residual warmth of the dogs turning the cab into a sanctuary against the biting cold outside. Rook lifted his massive head, watching her through the mesh partition with the quiet attentiveness of a guardian who read emotions before they were spoken. Harlow yawned, his sturdy frame rising and falling. With a tired huff, Nix cracked one pale eye open, as if conducting her own brief assessment before settling again. Seren's lips curved at the sight. The world could be hostile. People could be unpredictable. Storms could come without warning. But this small troop of 4 understood one another with a language deeper than words. The drive back down Raven Ridge Pass was slow but peaceful. The headlights cut along the newly iced road, casting long arcs of pale gold across the snow. The town's distant glow shimmered faintly below, a cluster of warm lights tucked into the valley, like embers in a great stone hearth. The events of the night replayed quietly in Seren's mind, not in chaos, but in clarity. The way Merritt Crow had tested her boundaries, the way the chain had swung, the way the dogs had moved like a single organism, each anticipating the others with a harmony born only of trust. She hadn't simply commanded them tonight. They had chosen to protect her with everything they had. That realization pressed something warm and heavy against the cold places inside her, the places shaped by past failures, by memories of arriving too late to save someone, by nights where she wondered if she had chosen the wrong path. But tonight had whispered a truth she had been reluctant to face. She was not defined by one moment of loss. She was defined by the moments she stood her ground, protected others, and allowed herself to be part of something larger than fear. A soft whine came from the back. Rook shifted closer to the mesh, as if sensing her thoughts. "I'm okay," she murmured, though the words were more for herself than for him. The truck's heater hummed, casting warm air across the cabin. Snowflakes drifted in lazy arcs outside, turning the world into a quiet, silvered dreamscape. As they descended toward Raven Ridge, Seren glimpsed a pair of headlights approaching from a side road. It was Sheriff Nolan Brackett, driving his old county cruiser. Brackett was a large man in his early 50s with a barrel chest, a graying mustache, and dark eyes that often hid more kindness than his rough exterior suggested. His thick hands bore scars from a wildfire rescue years back, scars that had made him more protective of his team than most sheriffs in the region. He slowed beside her, rolled down his window, and gave a firm nod through the swirling snow. "Heard you had yourself a night," he rumbled, his deep voice carrying hints of fatigue and fatherly concern. Seren gave a modest shrug. "Could have gone worse." Brackett's eyes flicked to the dogs, and a faint smile cracked his stern expression. "Not with those three. It couldn't." Then he gestured toward town. "Get some rest. You earned it." Seren continued down the pass, the sheriff's cruiser disappearing behind her. The valley opened below, waiting with its quiet streets and frost-tipped roofs. The storm was nearly over, the danger had passed, but inside the SUV, surrounded by three warm bodies breathing in rhythmic unison, Seren felt a certainty settle deep within her. She had a family, one built not by blood but by choice, loyalty, and shared storms weathered together. And on the coldest nights of Raven Ridge Pass, that kind of family was the strongest shield anyone could ask for. In the quiet glow of dawn settling over Sable Marsh, the world seemed to pause, as if heaven itself leaned closer to witness the reunion of a family once lost to the storm. Some might call it chance, others luck, but those who have walked through the hardest nights know better. Sometimes God sends his miracles in the shape of a loyal dog, a stranger who doesn't turn away, or a small light that refuses to die in the darkness. Cora's devotion, Oren's courage, and a little boy's will to survive were not just parts of a rescue. They were reminders, holy, humble reminders, that even in the loneliest marshes of our lives, none of us are ever truly abandoned. In our everyday moments, while we cook, drive, fold laundry, or sit quietly by a window, we often forget the gentle miracles happening all around us. A kind word, a helping hand, a heartbeat beside us, a small spark of hope we didn't expect. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs to remember that light still breaks through the darkest storms. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and maybe share a moment when you felt God's hand guiding you in your own life. And if you want more stories of courage, loyalty, and grace, stories that remind us of the unseen angels walking this world on 4 legs or 2, please subscribe to the channel. It helps these messages reach more people who might need a little hope today. May God bless you, protect your home, strengthen your family, and grant peace to your heart. And may He send you your own Cora when the night feels too long and the road feels too cold.